if you, and I'm talking to the audience, if you are looking at improving your social media presence as a way of looking like you're more engaged, then there's a chance that it's going to be disingenuous, which means that people might look at your posts and think, well, this is just, there's a regularity, but there's no real value. I felt a misloyalty. I don't know if that's a word, but my loyalty was misplaced in that the company that I worked for.
I really wanted to be wherever I want to work. I don't want to give my 100%. I want to give my 1000% because I have my potential. So that's also helpful for the companies as well. And also you are going to learn a lot ultimately.
Things can go really wrong when you're on stage. I'm not going to say that every time. I've had things go wrong where I've not been able to recover. And again, that's just something that practice will help you deal with.
More than you appreciate your time, you should appreciate your audience time, so that they should not, they should feel that they've learned something, or maybe while after go home, they should have some resemblance of yours.
But if you are speaking, like I've spoken in some countries like Australia, where if you ask the audience a question, you won't get a deathly silence. You might get one or two people answer. You'll get some engagement. It's not awkward. If you go to somewhere like India, I've spoken in India, like everybody wants to say hello. If you go to Singapore, it's kind of in the middle because they've got a little bit of that Asian quietness, but they've also got this westernized engagement style.
Hello everyone, welcome to the another episode of TACOS, where we'll be talking about community and open source. This talks are all about honoring the people for their contributions to building and nurturing community that support open source technology and cybersecurity for better and the safer world. Today's guest is Mr. Ben. Ben is an open source advocate, on a very enthusiast in open source. Currently, he's a developer advocate at Sonar. He has been running events and presenting at conferences, user groups for more than 14 years over the world. Of course, on the topics of ranging from the software development, video streaming technologies, digital privacy and security, open source in all sense. His experience as a technology leader comes from over 18 years in software engineering and 30 years experience in the requirement analysis, solution architectures, business development, and so many things. So let's right into the conversation with the Ben. And again, Ben, very warm welcome to TACOS.
Thank you. What an amazing introduction. I hadn't heard that before. You're making me feel slightly older with all of those numbers. Thank you for that. But no, it's been a fun career so far.
Yes, because when I was going through your profile, I was pretty amazed, and I already I known you for a while because of the part of the OpenSource Ambassador community, and we met in the last year in the Dev Days, right, in US.
We did, and so, you know what? I just got on like Google Photos. I got a here's something that happened a year ago. It was actually a year and a week since we last saw each other. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yes, and it was super fun, and to be very honest, I really want because you are the one of the most going to be memorable guest. Why? Because I chased a lot to be on this guest. You already know that, right? How many tasks you planned and got cancelled, right? But this is something I really wanted to do when I met you in person. I told you at that time that I really wanted to have you on my podcast, and
I remember we were talking about that. Yeah.
Yes, really want to talk like what exactly you do and the way you do. I know what you do, but the way you do, the way execution, the way you think, the way you plan, the way you and all impromptuness that you do. That's something I really want to talk about it.
Yep.
So let's right into this. So I know that you working currently as a developer advocate at Sonar, and you also worked with Auth0, right, as a senior developer advocate.
Yes.
Yeah. Being a developer advocate, that's carried actually a lot of responsibilities, right? And every organization has different way of what are the roles and responsibilities that has. What in your sense, what ideal developer advocates responsibility are, and how you come across this profile? And,
right.
Yeah.
So starting off with the easy questions, I see. What is developer advocacy? Like you said, every organization sees developer advocacy differently. I actually read a really interesting article, and I can't remember the name of the author. It came out like in the last week or so. And often when you look at engineers, you get like the I'm about to bang my microphone, the T model, where you've either got broad knowledge, but just a little bit of it, or you've got narrow focus but a lot of knowledge, and you've got like the deep T. And the article, if you want to go try and find it, something about the spider model instead of the T model, because the argument is that a developer advocate has like at least 8 different legs. And we're not quite as broad as a generalist engineer, but we're definitely not as narrow and not as deep, but we're deeper than a generalist engineer. And the idea is that not only are we engineers, we're also, in a sense, we're kind of marketing. I mean, that's another question, like where does DevRel sit within an organization? That's a whole other topic, which we can get to later maybe. Sometimes it falls under marketing, sometimes it's under product, sometimes it's under engineering. But as a developer advocate, I do work with a marketing team. So I need to have a little bit of knowledge about marketing, a little bit about design, even a little bit about speaking skills, a little bit about, I need to be a developer as well, right? Developer advocates are actually developers. We are software engineers who have had problems and challenges over the years. And we love talking to the community to find out what their problems and challenges are, because we want to either help or learn from what other people in the community have how they've overcome these kind of obstacles. So there's a lot of different hats that you're wearing as a developer advocate. And then if you look at what the company needs, different companies need different things. So my role at Sonar now is quite similar to the one that I had at Auth0, in that there's a lot about awareness and engagement and going out to the community, going to conferences, presenting on stage, but also being in the hallway track and talking to people and getting that feedback. But a friend of mine was a developer advocate for I guess they're kind of like a finance company for businesses that automates a lot of the back end expenses and money management side of things. And he was actually a developer advocate internally to his developer team and also into client developers. So it was very much a smaller ecosystem. He didn't go to conferences. He did a lot more, not so much the support side, because I believe that support falls outside of the scope of developer advocacy. But he would work directly with developers within existing customer relationships. So it depends on the company. There's no one rule for what developer advocacy is. It depends on the advocate. I probably would be the wrong person for the role that my friend had. I wouldn't, that's not where I find my joy. I love to be out with the community and to be right up in people's faces and finding out, like, what are you working on? Tell me about the things that drive you. What's your passion? All of those kind of things. Whereas when I told him the kind of things I do, he said, oh, I wouldn't be able to travel that much. I couldn't stand it. So it's so different. There is no one answer, which I guess doesn't help you. I haven't answered your question. I have failed you. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's completely okay, because even I felt so many people when they ask the same questions to me, but actually there's no perfect answer to this. To be according to me, there's no perfect answer for this, because every company has a different goals, right? Everyone different. Maybe they're running a product or service, right? Based on that, they wanted whether they wanted to interact their developer to their customers or vendors or a reseller partners, or maybe a pure developer community, or maybe they directly want their users to engage, right? So it completely different things. But here is the difficult question for you, right? Since I asked a very simple question. So
that's right. Make it harder. Come on, make me sweat a little.
Yeah. So most of the people to where I went and where I similar to you, I have a habit to talk a lot, similar to what you do. So pretty much similar. So they think that having on the social media or having a digital presence, or tons of reach or millions of reach, that's actually an ideal way of getting into the this kind of a product evangelist or a technical evangelist or a developer. Everything comes under the same umbrella only, right?
Right.
So what is your thought? Because I'm sure you might have work with a lot of developer advocates, might be on a very active on social media, or let's say work with the people also might come to you and they might think that okay, because nowadays people judge from your digital presence,
right?
And they think in that perspective that how much how good you are in a DevRel or in the work that you do.
Yeah.
So what is your take on that? Because I've seen, because I always say one thing, not all the billionaires are on the social media, or not all billionaires on the social media. So what is your take? Because I've seen you are not very active on social media, but I've seen you have very good engagement in the developer ecosystems and the developer community, right? So what's your mindset? Have you ever thought like, hey, I'm not active on social media, I don't tweet a lot, I don't post a lot, right? I don't make a lot of content, right? So yes,
I have had that thought fairly often. And over the years, I've played with some of these tools that allow you to schedule tweets and Facebook posts and all of these kind of things in order to try and get some kind of regular cadence of content on my social media presence. Because I was the same. I thought, well, as a developer advocate or as somebody who engages with the community, that's another engagement medium. I should be doing that more. One thing, I don't like the word should. I just shoulded myself. Should carries a lot of weight and expectation and these kind of things. So, but I did feel like maybe I should try harder. And I would do it for like a week or two, or maybe a month or two, and then I would run out of, not necessarily content, but I'd be focusing on a talk, and I would be traveling, and I would forget to set up for a couple of weeks. I'm like, well, what's the point? I've stopped now, so, and then I'd forget about it. But like you say, I'm not prolific on social media, but I still engage with the community in a way that I feel the community finds valuable, I guess. And I think that's the thing, is it doesn't really matter what media you use, as in the plural of medium. Is that right? No, media is the singular. It doesn't matter whether you're on social media or whether you're talking or whether you're writing blog posts or whether you're up in forums and helping people out. It doesn't matter how you contribute. What I think matters is whether the community finds value in what you do. That's my measure of not success, but performance, I guess, or value is, am I doing something that actually helps the developer community? At the end of the day, if I never tweet again, but I still provide value in some way to the community, I'm doing my job. I'm doing my job for my employer, but I'm also doing what I love. So that kind of works out.
Okay. And
also,
yeah.
I would like to point out that I'm not a millionaire or a billionaire. So I'm not sure whether that means I should be more likely or less likely to have a social media presence. I'm not sure.
Right. Neither me. So we are on the same boat.
Excellent.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll become a builder and we'll just cut out from the social media. No presence at all, 0 followers.
Well, I think the rule is if you become a billionaire, you start your own social media platform. Is that right?
The builder, yeah. Yes. Maybe we can do it together.
We can.
Yes. But let's say this is as a, the people who are looking at you now. Think about it when you're working in the organization, because this happened to me, because one of the company where I work as a platform advocate, or is one of the part, because when think about developer relation, that so many things come, right? Product advocate, platform advocate, technical evangelist. So I consider all are same, right? Because ultimately you're advocating for what product or service that you're working for, a company you're working for. But after having 1 or 2 months, I worked in that company, and my manager told me that, hey, why don't you tweet or post from your social media accounts? And then they told me that, can you handle our social media accounts, like LinkedIn page or thing? I said, I don't do that. Like I haven't done that. Like I just post about what are the, let's if I speaking somewhere, if I traveling somewhere, or let's post event photo of summary of what I did and a blog post or something, that I do that.
Yeah.
But that is being that you can do that. So I said, okay, I don't mind to handle it, because I am, but I'm not active on all the social media. Maybe Twitter, something I really liked it, or maybe LinkedIn. So I post, but after 2 days, they deleted that tweet. Then I asked my manager, like, why you deleted that tweet? He said, okay, we haven't got so much impression, and not so many retweets, not so many likes. I said, you are on Twitter, right? And you don't expect that you should come. So companies, like I'm talking about one of the companies I'm working for, I don't mind to because I work with the company who has think that what are the advocacies things, that what are the things that we should do it, right?
Yeah.
And also I work with a company who is totally opposite, who really wants to explore the social media reach in a sense way, because if I would put something like that, I don't care about what likes I got, what are things I got, I really don't care. But they did that, so I asked questions to them. They said like this, so since you worked in so many companies, I just worked in 4 to 5 companies, among that only 2 companies where I worked as a DevRel. So what is your thought, since you work with so many companies, and what's company's mindset, right? When they really also see your social media presence, they also see how much content you produce, maybe a blog post or maybe a video content, or maybe you are active on social media. Does really that, one of the, they really bother about that? Just wanted to understand from you.
Sure. I think there are like a couple of questions in there. The first one is my social media presence or is my network valuable when people are looking at hiring a DevRel?
Yes.
And you're also talking about, I think in a way, the difference between social media used for engagement versus marketing. And it sounds like that first company you worked for would definitely like, this is not working as a marketing piece, so we're going to take it away. Presumably because only having, 10 likes looked bad. So they obviously weren't focusing on engagement. They just wanted to be seen to be popular. But you can't build popularity if you don't engage first.
Exactly, because DevRel comes under the marketing team. Like we are also working with the marketing closely, right?
Right.
Not just the developer team, but also marketing team.
That's right. And regardless of where I was saying before that sometimes DevRel sits under marketing, but sometimes it's under product or engineering or something else. It doesn't matter where DevRel sits within an organization. They will always have some kind of engagement with the marketing team. That's inevitable. At the very least, when DevRel are going out to conferences, the marketing team will probably talk to their social media team and say, hey, we need to push out the fact that so-and-so is giving a talk at this event about blah. So there's always a very small touch point. Sometimes it's larger. Sometimes marketing teams will sponsor events and they'll send the marketing teams out and they'll ask for some developer advocates to go along to help with the more technical questions they get from people who come to the booth.
Right.
So the way that the two teams, the touch points that the two teams have within any one given organization can be very different, but there's usually at least some. The danger becomes when marketing feels that developer relations is a marketing channel. Which one of the things, and you said, I'm jumping all over the place here at the moment. One of the things you said earlier is that developer advocacy is about reaching out and advocating for products that your company has. There's a flip side to that as well. Developer advocacy is about advocating developers back into the company. So when I'm out and about, I've had this at Sonar already. I've been there for a few months now. And I had it quite a lot at Allsera. Somebody would come up to me and say, hey, I'm trying to do X, Y, Z, and it's not quite working for me. And I'd get my laptop out and we'd play around and we'll see if we can fix it or see if I can reproduce their problem. Or maybe I know that it's a limitation already. But I can take that information back to the developer team and say, hey, I just spoke to somebody who wants to do this. Seems like a good idea. Should we add it into the roadmap? Often developers don't have any way. I mean, you can go to the website and fill in the feedback form, but it just goes into a black hole. You don't know what happens. So one of the strengths of developer advocacy is actually advocating for the developer back into the organization. Now, if developers see the developer advocacy team in any company as being overly salesy or marketing, there's a natural tendency to not mistrust or distrust, but just change that relationship slightly. I've been to conferences where the booth is only staffed by marketing people and the connection seems disingenuous. They're just trying to get me to sign up and they don't actually care about me as a developer or the problems that I'm having. They just want to get my email into their database. And if developer advocacy is seen as doing that, then that's damaging the relationship between the organization and the community, in my opinion.
Right.
Going back to the question you started with, I think, was, yes, is the network important in the hiring process? And I think it absolutely is to a certain extent. You're going to get people who want to get into developer advocacy who are at a junior level, and they will most likely not have as big a network as somebody who's been doing developer advocacy or just community engagement of some sort for much longer. There are obviously cases where that's not the case. Somebody might have been working with a community for forever, but they've never had a developer advocacy job until now. But by and large, most people who get into developer advocacy because they want to engage with the community have already engaged with communities. Therefore, they have started to build that network. And there's actually value in a company hiring somebody who has access to a network already, because that's what you're trying to get. The company wants awareness, and the developers want the ability to, I don't know, get an inside view or inside peek into what's happening at the company you're working for, or be able to provide feedback, or be the first one to see a demo about a new feature, those kind of things. So there's this two-way relationship, and developer advocacy sits right in the middle. If you were to hire somebody who had no network already, that's not necessarily saying that that's a bad hire, But I think companies would be looking for people who already have existing relationships with communities out there. Now, this is an interesting conundrum sometimes, though, is that at least when I started at Auth0, and this is nothing against Auth0, this was me finding my feet as my first developer advocacy role, me finding my feet. I was trying to straddle that balance between I already have a presence in the community. I'd been speaking for, I don't know, 12 years or something on web application security and all of those kind of things. So I already had this presence and this recognition in the community, and I was now lending that in essence to Auth0. Meanwhile, Auth0 had a reputation, and by being employed by them, they were lending their reputation to me. So you've got this blurry middle ground now where I'm trying to make sure that what I do benefits my employer, but I also need to make sure that my personal standing in the community stands alone, that it still exists. Because if, and as happened recently, I then find want to move to another employer, if I walk away from Auth0 and all I've been doing for those 4.5 years has been purely focused at Auth0 and not at my own brand, it sounds a little bit cliquey to talk about personal brands, but it is essentially a personal brand of sorts. If I don't focus on my personal brand while I'm also working as a developer advocate for a company, then I'm doing myself a disservice for a future job. So it's a really interesting balancing point.
Right. And it's very also important, like because I think you are the voice in your community, and people, I say, like when people comes to you, like what are you going to talk about next? So people actually listening to you, right? Like what are you going to talk, and they get so very seriously.
Yeah.
And most important, the only reason I want to highlight this, because I don't want the people who are nowadays really chasing to have their better social media presence, any social media presence, right? Just to have to land to the job. But I think that should what is the priority. Your priority should be that you are better in delivering what you are doing it, right? Better to explain the content that you're doing it.
So this goes back to, are you doing this for the community, or are you doing this for another reason? Some people do it because they want to do marketing or sales. I don't think you'll find many developer advocates in that particular boat, but there's am I doing it for the community, or am I doing it for improving company numbers? If you, and I'm talking to the audience, if you are looking at improving your social media presence as a way of looking like you're more engaged, then there's a chance that's going to be disingenuous, which means that people might look at your posts and think, well, this is just, there's a regularity, but there's no real value. It's just a post for post's sake in order to have high engagement. That's not actually going to help you in the long run. You might get a short-term boost, and people might say, oh, there's some interesting stuff here. But once they realize it was being done purely for the views, people will disconnect. Whereas if you're creating content, if you love tweeting, just do it anyway, right? And if you find content if you're posting about things that are relevant to your community, the community will find that, and that will provide value to the community. Therefore, there is value in doing it. But if you're just, and this is what I found myself doing, was I wanted to only post stuff that was actually valuable. And I got to the point where I thought that's not the engagement that I enjoy. The engagement is finding things to share and then doing it in person or through webinars or or through podcasts like this.
Yes.
So there's nothing wrong with trying to grow your social media presence if that's what you want to do because you feel in your heart that that's the way you want to engage. If you're doing it just because you think it's a strategy, then it's probably not going to work out. It might. You might get a fluke. But that will be luck, not strategy.
Absolutely. And you never know what kind of a thing that you created for yourself. So just today, there one incident happened on the Twitter. I have a habit that whenever I, present anything, so I create one GitHub repository for that event and put all the materials. So because I'm very lazy, always I want to find, like, if anyone asks, so I'm myself very much, lazy that I need to go here, and I'm very messy in real life. So I just wanted to have everything in the one center place, so that once after anything is done, whether it's an event, workshop, or a conference or anything, so people should not have a trouble to find out all the details at one single place, right? So I do that. And I don't feel like, and I never ever care that whether it's useful. I thought that it is useful for me to find out myself the people who I'm engaging, right?
Right.
Today is what happened. Like one of the developer advocate from AppRite, somebody tweeted about that. What is the best way to have your presentation, everything about what you do in the event to have into one place? What is the best way? Somebody places, and 2 or 3 people said that best way is like put it in a one single repository, and all them refer my repository the way that I do.
Right.
And they found it very helpful. And then she asked me that can I use it? Well, of course, it's all open source, you can use it anyways. So always try to do the things for yourself, so ultimately it's get benefited to others, because all you are trying to do to save your time.
Yes.
Right? I think that is the best. Like if anyone asks what is the one thing that you do as a developer advocate, save your time. If you save your time, ultimately you save your time for your organizations, and also you saving your time for the users. So that is the best way to do it. You don't need to do any extra effort for that.
That's
what
true.
Do you say?
I think that's a great strategy, not just in developer advocacy, but in anything. I mean, you can even look at the proliferation of home automation nowadays. People will spend hours and hours and hours, weekends, setting up a home so that one day in the future they can say, hey, insert name of home automation device here, turn on the TV, which has saved them from leaning forwards, grabbing the remote control and pressing a button. But hey, it's cool. So we do live in a world where sometimes we will actually spend extraordinary amounts of time to save a little bit of time later. But the thing is, most people who do that are having fun at the same time. So I think it's important to balance time saving and fun. And sometimes the two are mutually exclusive. Yes, coming up with the processes and sometimes maybe automations that help you, and then sharing how you did that with others can help others do that as well. But I think also if you just do things that you find fun, then people are going to sense that passion when you're talking about it. I gave one talk back in, I'm guessing like 2008 or 9. And it's probably the worst talk I've ever given for 2 reasons. One, it was actually a really bad talk. And 2, I felt a misloyalty. I don't know if that's a word, but my loyalty was misplaced in that the company that I worked for said that they would pay for my travel and accommodation to go to this conference on the condition that I did a talk about one of the projects I worked on. And I thought, well, that's cool, because most of the stuff that I use is open source. It was an open source conference. That kind of worked. So I gave a talk, but it ended up feeling, by the time I gave it, a bit more like a sales pitch. And it wasn't great. So, talking about things where your passion actually lies, because I wasn't passionate about that talk. I'd written it with the mind of impressing my employer, not the community. Right. So that was a very early lesson. I never repeated that one again. I hope I didn't. If anybody's listening to this podcast and you've seen me give a talk after 2007 that you thought was absolutely rubbish, please let me know.
I'm the because when I gave my first international talk, right? When I traveled, my first country was New Zealand, and
beautiful country,
and it's beautiful country, yes, of course. And if you look at in India, is one of the farthest away. I almost 22 hours in a flight, 22 hours in the flight to just landed over there. So it's a long flight, and my first international flight was there. I wanted to give a presentation. Is one of the serverless days conference where it was, there was a whole story like how I got the visa. It's because I got sponsored by the New Zealand government at the time. So I got the visa in just 24 hours. It's
that's impressive.
And I went there, and my talk was around 30 minutes of talk, and at the very end moment, the organizer told me that can you finish your talk in 15 minutes. Because there is other sponsored organizer, they have stretched a little bit. So can you do that? Because I got myself sponsored by them, and this was my first international talk, and I don't know how I'm going to finish my presentation in just 15 minutes. It was my first international talk. But anyways, I did that, and I was not happy. I was I just went to the organizer and I told them, hey, I'm not very happy about what I did. And to be very honest, I came all the way. You guys sponsored me. He told me that after 7 days, this talk will be live on the YouTube. Just go there, watch, and make sure like how you did it. That's the best practice.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I say that it's a horrible, like I was so horrible. But if I look at now, so I improved a lot because
Mm-hmm.
I have something to compare now.
Yeah.
What are the mistakes that I've done? So now I improved. But in the same conference, what happened is in the same conference, but next year, one of the company, that company was from Australia. I don't want to name that company because now I don't want to name that company. But yeah, the company came to me. They was the salespeople, and
Right.
they told me, since my talk is around the security, and I was talking in OOPS New Zealand conference. So they told me, can you wear our t-shirt? So yeah, there was 2 days event, and it's like now we bonding, right? We chat with the people. Now we have good bond with them. Like we sit together, and so somebody from the sales team, and they come to me, they ask me, hey Mehul, can you wear our t-shirt and then present your talk, please? Why?
Mm-hmm.
He said, just because we really wanted to see tell our company that these are the sales that we did, and these are so that if you as any speaker who present our talk, so which means state that you really liked our services or something, right? It was a very big company from the Australia. They said that I denied that. Say I cannot do that because I'm here for talk about Auth Zero. So and I really believe in the mission. I really would like the product that that there's and it's if I do that, it's more like a sales pitch, and I don't want to do that. I denied
Mm-hmm.
so many sales pitch in my life because that doesn't make sense. If
Yeah.
you so this two things happened again a different corner, but in the same country, same city. But yeah, people do that like that, right? Have anything come across like this? Anyone comes to and asks you like this?
I have not had that. That's very cheeky.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
in a
yes.
small way, I'm slightly in awe of the fact they had the guts to even ask you.
Yeah.
Like who? But that said, there was a company I worked for, and was helping on the sponsorship booth at an event, and it was one of these situations again where it was actually worse in my mind. So I was talking before about how sometimes marketing teams will run the booth, and then developer advocates will come along and help with a bit more of a technical background. This one, for some reason, was staffed by a lot of salespeople, and it was very much a developer conference. It wasn't like a big multi-day, multi-country summit type thing. It was only runs once a year in one city, organized by locals, that kind of a conference. And I don't even know what a spiff is. I had to learn this while I was doing. I think I Googled it at the time or something, because somebody said, okay, we're going to do a spiff. Basically, a spiff it comes from the sales in like a real store sales processes. Sometimes in your warehouse at the back, you've got 3 TVs that are end of line. The manufacturer's brought out a new model. They're all on the shelf, but there's these 3 TVs they really need to get rid of. So they need to sell them. So they have this spiff, which is basically a promotion for the salespeople to say, hey, if you sell one of these TVs, you will get double bonus, or you can have Friday off, or whatever. So it's basically an incentive to get rid of old stock.
Right.
This is now also used in like the virtual product world, I guess, in sales and marketing in companies that sell services instead of products. Maybe it always has been, but anyway, it's a new term that I was made aware of. And while I was standing at this booth, one of the salespeople, who seemed to be the coordinator for the event, like the company who was sponsoring for their, they were like the key person from that company, and they said to the other people, okay, if you can get 3 people to sign up to the newsletter, you can go home. And this was like 10 a.m. And I thought, what is the point of being here? There were 4 or 5 people at the booth, which meant they were going to get 15 to 20 signups. My maths is bad at this time of day. But you're going to get some number of signups, and then they can go home. And this was on the morning of the second day of a 3-day conference. Like, so there's not going to be anybody at the booth tomorrow. So I forget how I got onto this mini rant. But yeah, being focused on the outcome that you want has to be aligned with the situation which you're in. And it wasn't in that case, which was very disappointing.
Yes, likewise.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's also important, like how you deal with that, and how you because some people maybe get through it, or maybe they might be agree. And I have a habit. If I have a disapproval or disagreement of anything, I straight away forward I say, because I really like what I do, right? And that is the only reason I'm doing it. Otherwise, I don't do that. From last 6 months, I'm constantly searching for a job, but I have not landed up with any good. The only because I really wanted to be, wherever I want to work, I don't want to give my 100%. I want to give my 1,000%, because I have my potential. So that's also helpful for the companies as well, and also you are going to learn a lot ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, I always say that it's going to benefit me, but ultimately when you think about that way, it'll ultimately benefit your community and also your company organization. So in that sense, but unfortunately, people don't have that mindset anyways. But
Right.
yeah, we talked about the event a lot, and we talk about the presentations, and I think you founded one Palani events, which helps people from to boost their presentation skills, or being an advocate for any product or service is very important, because it's very important how you present, what you present, and is your message is conveying or not, and specifically how confidently you delivering it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is your suggestion for those who ask or wanted to, you know I don't want to say become public speaker or become a tech speaker, but whatever they want to present, even they want to present in your own company, where in their own team,
Yeah.
right? Because it's very important to when whatever you present, your message should be conveyed, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, I guess the general advice is obviously practice. The more you do it, the first talk I ever gave was at a meetup in Melbourne in 2003, and I was so nervous. I'm pretty sure I skipped over I didn't do a live demo. I like to do live demos nowadays, but back then I was like, I need everything to be controlled. I know exactly what my slides are like. I take screenshots of the code and I talk about it, and even then, as I was going over things, my brain was going faster than my mouth, which happens for a lot of people. Brains are naturally faster than the ability to speak. And I'm pretty sure I skipped over whole sections of stuff and didn't explain things fully. It wasn't recorded, so I will never get the opportunity to laugh at myself for that one. But at the time, I definitely didn't get an opportunity to re-see it and improve. Your example earlier of having seen your talk in New Zealand and being able to see that and then see your improvement now, but also at the time, presumably look into it and say, what can I do slightly better for next time? And it's all about baby steps. Identify
Right.
something that you didn't like in your last talk. Don't admonish yourself, but just look at it all and say, the one thing that I would change about that is blah, and then do that the next time until you've got that working. One of the things that I have a problem with, and even during this podcast, I'm hearing myself speaking very quickly, and I do have a natural tendency to talk very fast, which is an issue. Not just for, there's a huge population, a larger population of non-English speakers than of English speakers or as a first language. And slowing down means that more people get access to be able to understand what I'm saying. But even I've had English speakers, people who've lived in the UK for their entire lives, come up to me and say, hey, dude, you speak too fast. I didn't follow that. So I know that I need to slow down. That's one of my number one key things.
Okay.
But I identified that through watching me talk and going, geez, I need to slow down. So yeah, watch yourself. If you can, get a recording. It feels weird, but if you've got a camera, and most of us have a camera, there's one, just set it up on a tripod, point it at yourself, or lean it against a table if you don't have a tripod, point it at yourself. It'll feel very awkward, but just give the talk to your camera. You don't even need to connect up to a projector. Just hold the laptop in your hand and pace through it. The camera doesn't need to see the slides because you're the one who's going to be watching the video later. And just watch that and then take some feedback for yourself. Watch it once. Get all of the irky feelings out of your body going, oh my God, I look terrible. Is that what I sound like? If you've never heard yourself, most of us nowadays have, because recording voices is ubiquitous and we're on TikTok all the time. But the first time you hear yourself played back to you, you're like, is that me? Then no, that can't be right. It took me a long time just to get used to my own voice. But yeah, practice. Now, contextually, it depends also on where you want to speak. If you're giving an internal presentation to your team, unless you work in a toxic environment, in which case you should consider moving, you're going to be surrounded by people who want you to succeed. So even if you mess up the presentation, even if you get flustered and you've got to go back and you're all over the place, they want to know what you're presenting. So just remember, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time, nobody's actually judging you for the way you're presenting. A lot of people in the room, if they do presentations really well and you're like, oh, I wish I could talk as well as Mary, she was in the same position as you once upon a time. So she's going to be like, oh, I remember that. Poor guy. If you want to speak at conferences, then start small. Find a local meetup. Give your talk there. Rehearse in front of 20 to 100 people instead of 100 to 400 people. If you go straight into a big conference of, 4,000 people in an 8-track conference and there are 500 people in your room and that's your first experience of speaking, it is natural to feel a little bit terrified about that. So start small, baby steps, work your way up.
Right.
And the advantage of the meetups as well is often nowadays, a lot of meetups are also recorded. And if that's the case, then they will be able to provide you with a video for you to do more self-improvement on.
Absolutely. And also would love to add that once you start with any meetups or something, you can start gathering the feedback, because what I've seen, once you're done with the presentation, most of the time people don't come. Even until you have not done so many engagements, or maybe you are so popular in the developer community and people knows and they come to you. But in the very beginning, what I used to do, I just go to any random people and ask, hey, how my presentation look like? Do you think any improvement needed? Have you cleared about what I like? What are the examples that I gave? Any references or any feedback that you can give it to me?
Yeah.
So I have a habit to ask this a lot. Sometimes maybe people don't answer, they just go away. But yeah, but still I did that because that's the only way that I can get the feedback. Because now this is my first talk. People don't know me. I have to go to them. I have to chase them. Or
and
maybe have a recorded video I can send to them and they can give. Yes.
Totally. And if it feels awkward to go up to a stranger and say, how was my talk? Ask the organizer, because the organizer has probably seen every single talk for a year and they will have some ideas. But also say to them, look, I'd love your feedback on how my talk went and where I can improve, because I'm pretty new to this and I want to get better. But also, who else here comes regularly enough and you feel would be able to provide me some good feedback? Because they will know the regular members. They'll probably be friends with some of the regular members, and they will know the kind of people who would give you constructive feedback. Because a lot of people, if you just go to a random stranger, maybe it's only the third time they've been to the meetup, and they say, oh no, yeah, it was great. Because they haven't thought about it. Like they don't want to upset you. They don't want to think about it too much. They just want to eat pizza. Just leave me alone, dude. Whereas if you get a recommendation of who to talk to, they're more likely to actually take some time and have a chat with you about what they think.
100%. And I think
this pizza is important.
Yes. And this is the first step to engage with them, I guess, because engagement is very important part.
Right.
Because that make them feel that you are a part of it. You also making them feel that they are also important, being they came over here to attend your talk or meetup, right?
That's it.
And that also, I think that it's lacking in somewhere, like when I've seen other people to present, right? Because it's very important when you go and let's say present anything or engage your audience. The best way to engage your audience, that you should make them feel that you are a part of it. You can go them and understand what their mindset is. Because whenever you go, you know your mindset. Yeah. You know what are the present, you know that. But your audience might be different. So you have to engage different way. You have to make them a different way. You might have to give different kind of examples, right? Maybe possible that we meet in the conference and that group in 5 people. You might engage with all of them, but you might give the different example to each of them for the same definition or the same product or same service, because everyone's mindset is different. Yes. And I still remember, you rightly said, and even that happened in when we met in the dev days, and I got stuck in. There was one competition was there, right, where we have to build the 4.0 identity systems on the different platforms, and I have to build on the GCP by using the Angular, and I got stuck at some position. I cleared the second level, because each level you get some swag and then you can redeem to get some goodies, right? As far as I remember.
Yep.
So Time was passed. I cleared the first one, but second, when I entered and I was stuck somewhere, and I think I asked you because you were leading that group,
Mhm.
and you came over there, and after finishing it up, you asked to let's replicate this task to understand that how it's gonna go.
Yeah.
And at the time I understood, because so that is the best way, because what issue I'm facing, how would you know? So
Mhm.
the best way to replicate, because that way you can also understand what issue I'm facing.
Sure.
Also, it will also help me to understand like what are have I done any mistakes while setting it up,
That's it.
right? So probably there will be two cases.
Yeah.
So this is also a way of engaging to make them feel that okay, you are giving the important. You are trying your best to give me the solution. And
That's
anyways,
it.
anyways, I got the that's right, because you gave it to me and then I read a break. So, but
But yeah, you're
so
right. When you're trying to help somebody with a problem, oftentimes people will come to you with a situation like, this is where I'm at now, how do I fix it? And you have no
right,
context of how they got there. So it's important to have that
exactly.
context, whether they explain it or you go through it again or whatever. Having a common understanding is the first step to being able to solve a problem.
Right. And what is the best way to make them yourself understand? That is the main criteria,
Yep.
right? So what is your way of, let's say, if anyone wants to, they do presentation, they go talk a lot, but what is the best way to engage, right? So this is one I've already found since we were both part of it. So I just gave a reference over here.
Yeah.
So apart from, what is the other ways of, engage your audience?
This depends entirely on who's up on stage. The way
Right.
I engage an audience will be different to the way you engage an audience, which would be different, probably in many ways, to anybody who's listening to this. Ultimately, I will always come back to being genuine. You need to. There's no point in getting somebody to replicate what they've done to try and understand where they're coming from, so you can help them if you don't actually care. If you don't actually care, then maybe consider a different job role. But like, the way that you engage with people on stage is going to depend on your personality, whether or not you want to solicit audience feedback, whether you prefer to just talk and not have any questions and answers at the end and talk to people in the hallway track. All of these are valid choices. It depends on what you're comfortable with. One thing to remember is that even if you're in DevRel, even if you're employed as a developer advocate and you're on stage at a conference and you're giving a talk, you don't owe anybody more than you want to give. There's no expectation for you to take questions and answers. Well, take questions and give answers at the end of your talk. It happens in many talks. It doesn't happen in all of them. If you don't feel comfortable answering questions that you're not prepared for on stage, don't. You don't even have to say, hey, I'm not going to be taking any questions. You can just finish your talk with something like, thank you so much for coming along. I hope you've learned a lot from this. I'm going to be hanging around to the rest of the conference if you want to ask me any questions. Have a great day. And that implies there are no questions. So you can be kind about it without sounding or feeling like you're putting up a wall, because you're not. You're just. I mean, it is kind of a wall. You're putting your boundaries in place, which are absolutely valid. How you want to engage is exactly down to you. The way that I like to engage is, I was saying earlier that I try to do live demos nowadays. And I still remember my best/worst live demo was at PHP Australia in 2015, I think. This was back in the day when I ran Linux on my MacBook Pro, and it only had a VGA port, for those of you who remember. Oh no, it had a HDMI port, but the control box in the front next to the podium. Well, it went up into a control room and then up to the projector and all over the place. But they only had VGA at the front, which for most people was fine because you get a dongle, you can use VGA or HDMI. However, when you're running Linux on a MacBook Pro, often more proprietary things like VGA don't work. And just as a side part of this story, it's not that VGA didn't work. It's that projectors, when they're connected via VGA, not HDMI, via VGA will send a signal back to the device that's trying to connect to it, the laptop in this situation, with a matrix of refresh frequencies and resolutions that it supports. And it'll say, okay, well, I support 60 hertz at 1024 by 768, and I support this, and I support that, and I support the other. And then the device that's connected to it will pick one that most closely matches what the user likes or is the highest quality available or whatever. Most projectors don't actually send that information back. And what's happened instead is that proprietary graphics drivers store that information inside the driver. So it says, okay, I know I've connected to an Epson 123, and looking it up in my own personal proprietary list over here, I can see it supports these. Meanwhile, the Epson, or whatever, I'm not picking on Epson, the projector will send back a matrix that's 0 by 0, a table of 0 by 0 columns, basically empty data. So a Linux machine that doesn't have proprietary graphics drivers doesn't have, it's basically told, hey, I'm a projector and I support no resolutions. So the Linux machine actually creates a 0 by 0 pixel display because that's what it's being told it can do, which confuses the machine, will either crash it or just have no effect. So that's the situation I was in. It wasn't working. So I said, okay, you know what? I can install, I can update the X11 org drivers, and this is starting to get quite Linux geeky. I SSH'd into my server at home because I had an old configuration that allowed me to connect to an external screen with a fixed resolution type, which I think was probably 60 hertz at 1024 by 768, because pretty much everything supports that. And so I SSH'd into my machine at home from this conference. It was in Sydney, and my home was in Melbourne. I downloaded the file, I replaced it on the local machine, restarted my laptop, and then my laptop wouldn't start. I'm 2 hours out from giving my talk, or 3. I'm glad that I got in early to try this because I knew I was going to have issues. So a friend of mine who was with me as a support buddy said, hey, why don't you use my laptop? And everything was in GitHub. Here's another bit of advice. Make sure you've got a backup of your talk and your demos and everything somewhere else. So I downloaded everything onto this laptop and I got it set up, but this machine only had HDMI. It had no capability to plug in via VGA, but there was an HDMI port at the very back of the room. So I went to the organizer and I said, hey, look, I need to borrow an HDMI cable and we're going to connect to the back of the room. I can use my clicker for the main presentation, but about 80% of my presentation is live coding. But the talk was about writing viruses. I said, I can like put on a hood and I can pull it up and I can pretend to be a hacker and I'll disappear to the back of the room with a microphone. So I'll be talking about it and people can see what I'm doing on screen, and I'll be like, I will tell them I'm retreating to my hacker cave. So I created this whole narrative about how we can get away with the fact that my laptop's at the back of the room. And then another friend came along and said, my laptop supports VGA. Do you want to use that one? So by this point, I'm currently sitting at the front of the hall. There's 2 talks back to back. One by somebody else and then me straight away afterwards. So I'm sitting at the front of the room, setting up this friend's laptop, the 3rd laptop I've set up today for this demo. And now the downside to this one is that the battery is dead, so it has to be permanently plugged into the mains. So I have to sit right by the podium, plugged into the mains of the podium, trying to get people not to trip over the cable so I can just move the laptop over. I get it all set up. I start the presentation and I tell the audience about what it's taken so far to get there, and everyone's kind of amused. Always share your failures and your successes with the audience in a fun way, because it's a way to engage them, break down that wall between the podium and the people. And I'm giving my talk, and then I'm running demos, and then I run a command, and I get a PHP error connecting to MySQL, because one of the things I hadn't done was install the PHP MySQL driver. Now, at this point, the audience gets involved, and they're telling me what to type into the command line in order to install the packages and the modules that I need. And we get to the end, and luckily I managed to get it done in time, but it was a great engagement with the audience. Now, if I just considered the way I felt right at the beginning, where everything was falling apart, my laptop wasn't working, and suddenly it crashed, I could have just turned around to the organizer and say, look, I've had a severity 1 issue with my laptop. I can't present today, I'm sorry. But what's the word I'm looking for? Tenacious is one word some people might use. I'm thinking of one that's slightly more derogatory towards myself. I'm a knucklehead. I don't give up for right or wrong. And it just so happens, and I think there was a lot of luck on my side, but it just so happens that this talk turned also into one of my best, because the engagement with the audience, I think not only did they learn what I wanted to talk to them about, but we learned things like how to set up MySQL for PHP really quickly. If anybody in the audience hadn't done that before, they just saw me do it in like 3 seconds. Various other things. The most fun part, though, was that the talk itself was about how a malicious JPEG could contain a payload that a PHP application that looked like most of it was quite safe actually had a vulnerability in it. And by uploading this image into this gallery app that I just live coded, it would then infect the machine. The inventor of PHP, Rasmus, was in the audience. He was the keynote speaker that morning. And he says, it was a great talk, but like, how often do you see, and I explained where the vulnerability was. He says, how often do you see that in real life? Like, that doesn't happen though, does it? So if that ever happens to you and you're fairly confident in what the audience is going to say, ask the audience. I said, okay, so hands up, not necessarily this exact situation, but hands up who's seen code that ostensibly looks sane, but actually has a vulnerability in it in live production code. And I put my hand up, and then about 60% of the audience put their hand up. And Rasmus was like, oh, right, okay. It's like nothing against PHP. It's about the fact that software is written by humans and humans make mistakes,
Yes.
which was the underlying story. But yeah, so things can go really wrong when you're on stage. I'm not going to say that every time. I've had things go wrong where I've not been able to recover. And again, that's just something that practice will help you deal with. Whether it's a talk about IoT and the thing you've soldered has just broken, and therefore you can't give your demo. You can't just get a soldering iron out and fix it while you're on stage. So have backups in place as well. I will often, not always, but I will often make sure that I've got a video of me doing a live IoT presentation, so that if something physically breaks, I can say, okay, well, look, this is broken, but let's go. Here's a video. I'll skip to the part where we got up to. Let's just watch the video and I'll talk through it. It's not as great an experience for the audience, but at least the message still gets conveyed.
100%. I think in this whole incident, the one thing that I can pick up is the presence of mind. That this second, I think like your mind automatically try to what should you do next. Either you got stuck somewhere or you try to fix it. Maybe if one thing is not work, you try second, you try third. And
but the other thing that really helps is ask a friend, because sometimes you might think, oh, I need to try this next. And somebody might say, but why don't you do that? That's so much easier. And like, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that, because you can become hyper-focused sometimes.
Yes. And by the time you fixed it, that actually becomes the whole incident or a story. And by the time that's complete and become a story, apart from you, there are other people also who already got involved since you got stuck, right?
Totally.
So that ultimately create an engagement, and people love the story, to be very honest. Whenever you go, they don't want, because they might get the same thing on the YouTube as well, or any other sense, or blog post. But how you convey the story in a story manner, maybe because everyone got this issue, right? And the second is how much enthusiasm or passion you are, because that energy actually reflects a lot. That's what I've seen. If you are yourself so energetic, or so enthusiasm about that, hey, I really want to do it. Maybe you, I still remember when I was in Italy and one conference, my talk was like right after the lunch, and you know what happens right after lunch, right? People might feel sleepy. So what I did is to,
especially in Italy, all that pasta, too many carbs.
And so what I did, there was a stage which has, I guess, 3 feet of height, I would say. I jumped directly into the audience from the podium, jumped into the, audience right said to me. And I don't know why I did it. I just did it. I don't know, but then it went so good, because now people got attention. That, hey, the guy is so energetic now. We have to pay attention, because I have a habit, like, make sure that the reason I came over here, I wanted to give my 1000%. And so more than you appreciate your time, you should appreciate your audience time, so that they should not, they should feel that they've learned something, or maybe while after go home, they should have some resemblance of yours. Maybe going to a Twitter or follow you, or maybe the link that you shared that may seen, or maybe the topic that you presented, or after going home, they search about it. So means you done your job. So
you've just reminded me of another tip, something that I think is probably like one of the biggest secrets that most people don't talk about necessarily is, I like the way you gave an example of huge amount of energy to wake the audience up, to like click them into action. Like, what's going on? And often a change in situation can create an environment in which the audience will kind of stop and look up. And one thing that I've learned is that when you're about to give the most important bit of information in your talk, the one thing, if there's only one thing they take away from your talk, this is the one thing that you want them to take away. Leave a pause, like I did just then. See what I did?
Yes,
Leave a
yes,
pause,
yes.
because sudden silence. You fall asleep in a room, in a conference, and there's this voice in the background, and they're talking, and it's kind of soothing, and you're kind of, yeah, this is really nice, and you're kind of falling away, and then suddenly everything goes quiet. You're like, did it finish? What's going on? And your body notices the silence, and then you wake up and
Yes.
you hear the person say,
Yes.
insert silence. So yes, a little bit of silence just before the final part. Don't be afraid of silence.
Right. Right.
There's often people who say don't and ah, and that is important. It's better to leave a small silence than to say or ah or any other filler word.
Absolutely.
But using silence strategically like that is really powerful.
Yes. 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 And the best way is like, so I have a habit to experiment this, because ultimately we don't get any way to experiment anyways. So people often might have asked you about, like how you want to how to be a public speaker or tech speaker. So I said, I don't have that much experience. I openly, I don't have that much experience, but yeah, I have did so many experiment over these years.
Yeah.
So that is the reason, that may be the reason I know this much, right? Because I did still now. Whenever I go for my any of meetup or a conference, I'll be same enthusiast, whether I have 5 people to address or 5,000 people to address.
Yeah.
And second is, I always try something different in my every talk. Maybe I don't know. Maybe based on the audience, I try to interact with them, and I tried, because that is the room for me to experiment. I won't get chance any other chance to interact with, or maybe to experiment the same thing, because I have an audience, can experiment with them. If that doesn't work, I don't experiment in the next talk.
Yep,
but
that's it.
This is the time you can do it. So this way you can, and all these example that you shared, or incident that you shared, or the example that I shared, that all come with the experiment only. Otherwise, how would you know this?
Exactly. So again, it's about practice, but I love the fact that you're also saying experimentation, because unless you try new things, you don't work out what works. But one thing you've just reminded me of is if any of you are in the position where you can give talks in multiple countries, also be aware of cultural differences. Not so much in like how you communicate, because we're a pretty open world now, and most people are okay with any kind of presentation style. An Australian coming into a talk in I don't know, France is not going to be expected to speak like a French person, whereas maybe 20 years ago, before the world was so open, as in like so connected. But if you are speaking, like I've spoken in some countries like Australia, where if you ask the audience a question, you won't get a deathly silence. You might get 1 or 2 people answer. You'll get some engagement. It's not awkward. If you go to somewhere like India, I've spoken in India, like everybody wants to say hello. If you go to Singapore, it's kind of in the middle, because they've got a little bit of that Asian quietness, but they've also got this westernized engagement style. If you go to Norway, nobody is going to answer you, and you will get this deathly silence. And that's nothing against the Norwegians. It's just a culture difference. So depending on where you're talking, you might also want to even change your engagement style in advance. Don't rely on audience members giving you information for you to then carry on with. For example, if you asked a question of, is there anything on this slide here that anybody would particularly like me to dive into deeper, because we don't have enough time to go into all of it? Some countries you won't get any responses. So instead, prepare for that in advance and say, so we don't have time to go into all of these, but what I find is most often people are concerned about option B. So let's have a look into that one. If you want to find out about any of the others, come talk to me afterwards. And suddenly you've made it a lot more comfortable for the audience, while not really diminishing your presentation style.
100%, 100%. And I think one of the things that I realized myself, that the reason this go well, or because we really like the work that we're doing, or we really enjoyed our the job that we are doing it. So that is the best part. And I'm sure you work with so many companies, right? And you work with so many different roles. Right. So what was the one role? Because I can still recall what are the one role that I really enjoyed a lot. Any of the roles that you think that it's like it was awesome, or let's say you enjoyed a lot with that organization, or let's say by pursuing to that particular role?
I would have to say hands down developer advocacy is the role that suits me the best. It's the one that I love. When I left Auth0, I knew that my next job had to be in developer advocacy still.
Right.
But I came before I started at Auth0. I was a security consultant and a contract software engineer, I guess. And I really loved moving from one project to another every 3 to 9 months. Long time ago, in like 20 years ago, when I was a full-time employee, I would find that I would move from one job to another every 6 to 12 months anyway, until I ended up at a marketing agency as a software engineer there, working on websites for all their customers. And that's actually where I started my career in London as well. And I thought to myself, I was in this job in London for 3 years, and after 3 years of being in this one job in Melbourne, I thought, why am I still here? And I was reflecting over the fact that I kept moving ever since I moved to Australia. The longest job I had was 13 months, I think. And I thought, why is it that I'm still here? What's the difference? And the difference for me was that when I worked in a product company, I was working on the same project every day. Whereas when I worked in an agency, I was working on a different project every 2 weeks or every 2 months. And it was almost like moving company, because I was moving project. And I personally need a change in the challenges that I face on a day-to-day or a month-to-month basis. So after that, I moved into contracting consulting, because I thought, well, I would like to work for product companies, but I don't want to be there for 3, 4, 5 years. So why not do it on a contract basis where I intentionally go in only for a fixed 6 or 9 months or whatever it is? And that worked really well for me. I enjoyed that a lot. And it also meant that because I ran my own business, it meant that if I wanted to go to the other side of the world to speak at a conference, I would just inform my client that I wouldn't be available that week. It's a very different engagement to employee-employer relationship. So that suited me really well. And it was while I was traveling around at these conferences that I met a guy called Joel Law, who was a developer advocate for Auth0 living in Canada. And we'd seen each other at a couple of conferences, and he said to me one day, look, if you love travel, if you love connecting with the community, if you love learning from and sharing your knowledge with people, and you love security, I'm like, yes. He said, you should become a developer advocate for Auth0. I'm like, okay, but I enjoy, like in my mind, like this works for me. I don't want to work for one product company. Right. He nagged me so much that in the end I said, look, okay, I'll do the interview process just to keep you quiet. I went through the interview process, and as I spoke to other developer advocates, I knew a couple of developer advocates, just having met them on the conference scene, but I didn't really understand fully what it entailed. But having spoken to them about the job role, I thought this could actually work. So I closed my business down and I started working as developer advocate, and I get exactly what I need because I've got that constant change. I work on different projects all the time. I'm writing new content all the time. I'm learning about new technologies in order to be able to integrate them into other existing passions of mine and turn those into talks or blog posts. I get to go and see the community instead of going to 4 or 5 conferences a year. I sometimes go to 4 or 5 a month. It's exactly what I want, but it is a very specific kind of role. It's not for everybody, but if that's the kind of thing you like, and that's my version of developer advocacy. Remember at the beginning we were talking about what is a developer advocate? Yeah, there are very many different. A good friend of mine used to be a developer advocate for PayPal, and he traveled so much. It was crazy for him. He recently bought a plot of land in the middle of nowhere, has some horses, he grows his own veggies, lives there with his wife, very happy. He's still a developer advocate. He just works on more of the content side of stuff rather than the in-person. He'll still do virtual things. But he's created developer advocacy to be exactly what he wants for him. And I think that's absolutely great. So if connecting with the community is what you want to do, developer advocacy can support you if you know your boundaries and you make sure that it's what you want for you, and you find the right company who needs that kind of a developer advocate.
And here the most important part that you rightly highlighted is networking, right? You build a very good set of network, and that might be ended up with a good opportunity. Maybe it opportunity with the collaborate with someone, or maybe a paid gig, or let's say open source gig, or maybe a full-time opportunity, right? Because you never know. But I think one of the good areas is you have sheer passion of what you work and the networking, right?
Yes. Networking is also important, not just for the value you bring to the company, but also for finding that job in the first place, as you say. I think, generally speaking, when you're a junior at anything, most of the jobs you find are through applying for advertised jobs. And as your seniority increases, more and more the jobs that you find are through your network. When I was looking for my next opportunity after Auth0, I was talking to a handful of companies. Some of them had reached out to me directly, and some of them I had reached out to. And Sonar was one of the ones that reached out to me. And it's because of the fact that they knew of me through shared networks. So that's not necessarily always going to be the case. It's different for different people. It'll probably be different for me next time. But what I mean to say is that if you don't have a huge network now, but you want to get into developer advocacy, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to build the network first. You can apply for jobs. If you've already got a demonstrated passion for sharing with the community, even if you don't have a huge network, maybe you post to a developer blog on a regular basis, or maybe you have spoken to a couple of meetups, but you don't really have a following as such. As long as you can demonstrate to a potential employer what value you would bring in that role, just go for it.
Exactly. But right now, since I already said from last 6 months, I'm exploring a lot about the developer advocacy. And as you know, the current market scenario is not that good. A lot of companies are firing, right? And not so good company hiring. Most of my, so many of the people in my network also, they are kind of struggling, specifically in the developer advocacy role, because but I'm sure they look for the only reason they want to do, because they like the fancy thing. For they traveled a lot, go to meetup and conference. For them, it's a fancy. But when I looked at in this perspective, that I wanted to engage with the people, I wanted to present what I talk, and that might be a good learning aspect for me. But when I chatted with a couple of companies, the only hurdle that I found is now the location, right? Because I'm currently from India, and now in a developer advocate, since in the COVID time they want remote, but now people want in-person meetups, conference. They want the physical presence. And for that, because developer advocacy is still not very much, let's say, wider or accepted in couple of the let's say in the APAC. It's not that popular, right? Because not so many companies, right? They are trying to adopt slowly, but they not think that's a huge demand. And in India, uh, uh, it's completely different, because not so many people or the company not understand the need of the this kind of a roles. Like what are the roles that come into the board. But maybe in the future, because at least now people talk about it, that's a good sense. Before 5 years, nobody must talk about it. So that's a good thing. Now people talk about it. There are so many conferences happening in the India, right? You already attended you. So it's a good to see that maybe in the future it's going to be high demand that we companies might be looking for. But also I observed, like, you go to conference, you go to meeting, but it's also important what you present, what you like to talk about most. And you don't want to talk about which others talk about. For example, if I see you talk about cybersecurity or security in sense, right? And I see that okay, you are a developer, so now I wanted to become a developer advocate, and I started talk about security, though I don't like to talk about it, right? So what are the, I think you should talk about the topic which you are comfortable or really would like to talk about. So what are the topics that you talk often, and is there any particular topic that people often requested you that, hey, can you talk about this? People tend to suggest that, can you talk about this? Can you talk about that? So have you got this demand from the community?
The things that I like talking about changes, and it goes back to what I was saying before about finding something that aligns with your passion. If there's something I'm going to spend a weekend researching because I'm interested in it, then that's a good topic for me to talk about, because I'm going to be extremely passionate about it. I'm going to put in extra thought cycles. I'll probably be dreaming about the topic because I'm interested in it, not because I feel like, oh, I've got to write this talk. So a lot of the talks that I have proposed in the past have been around projects or even thought ideas that I've had that I want to explore more. So sometimes I'll use an accepted conference talk as a a driver to learn more about something. It's not that I don't want to learn about it. It's that I'm trying to time optimize. And I think, you know what? I want to learn about A, B, and C. So I'm going to submit a talk about A, a talk about B, and a talk about C to conferences. And whichever one gets accepted first, that's the one I'm going to learn about, because I only have so many hours in the day. So that's one way of doing it.
Okay.
I have given talks in the past about things that I'm not interested in, and those have been the talks that haven't been received so well by the audience, because passion doesn't come through. Sometimes during Q&A, they'll ask a question. I'm like, I don't actually understand the question. Never mind, know what the answer is. It's not a good idea to talk about things you don't have a passion about, because by definition, you don't care enough. And it's all about caring. It's all about, again, providing value to the community. And the way you do that is by sharing with them the things that you care about. And that brings that passion out. So the kind of things that I've spoken about in the past have been IoT. I've got a talk where I take a full-size door that actually folds up and fits inside my suitcase. And it's an IoT remote controllable unlockable door that uses JSON Web Tokens, NFC cards that get programmed by a mobile app, and all of those kind of things. So I was looking into home automation, and I was trying to work out how can I make my house secure without connecting it to the cloud. So this door can actually be unlocked without it being connected to the cloud. So that's something I had a passion about. I wrote a talk about it, got accepted, and I think that door went around the world 3 times, and went to about 10 different conferences. So that was kind of cool. At the moment, I'm working on a talk about relationship-based access control, because it's a fairly new-ish addition to the way that access control works. And I've played with it a little, but I want to learn more. So it's actually been accepted to a conference later on this year. So I now have not just motivation, but also the requirement to do more research into that and to build some demos. So yeah, it's just about whatever's going on in my head at any one time. I'll think, is there an opportunity to share what I'm learning with other people? Because that's what it's about at the end of the day for me.
Exactly. And you rightly said about on a weekend, you work on a topic and you do research about it. And after doing research, when you don't look at the clock.
Yes.
So, which means you really like the particular topic.
That's it.
And you should really talk about this, because that way you can give more relevant examples, right? Which you already get every day. Yeah.
It's important at the same time to, from a work-life balance perspective, to make sure that you're not treating the weekend as time to work on your talk.
Right.
Unless, before I became a developer advocate, I would work evenings and weekends on my talks, because I was still going to speak at conferences, because I enjoyed that, but I had a day job. So if you're in developer advocacy, make sure that you still maintain that healthy personal work-life balance type thing. Because the last thing you want to do is to be up at 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening struggling with a PowerPoint presentation, because you think, you know what, I've got other things I need to do this week and I just need to nail this presentation down. And then suddenly you start losing the joy, because suddenly you're working weekends, and that's not good either.
Right. It's really very important. Actually, a few weeks back, I was having the podcast with one of the developer advocate from the Trust Test, which was the recent graduate project from the Cloud Native Foundation. And the podcast already released. And during the podcast, one of the things that he really highlighted is that you really need to work on your work-life balance. You really need to at least give yourself 1 hour every day to work out, because being a developer advocate, you traveled a lot, you got stuck to a lot of things, right? So make sure that you're not frustrated. The best way is to make sure you do some kind of activity just for yourself, and don't looking at the laptop. Don't do any shit. No, stay away from your phone, internet, everything, and just give yourself 1 hour and go to gym, go running, do things. And he asked me that you have to promise me that after doing this podcast you're going to start running, because that's something I really like, but I'm not able to manage my calendar is so messed up. But yeah, I really would like to how much is important. And I'm sure you must be relate, what do you want to say on that, being a developer advocate is a very tedious job as well, because you also work with the different teams. You creating a lot of technical demos. You also traveling. You give a presentation. You also do a lot of things. So how much is important also to give your personal life also equivalence? Yes,
it's extremely important. The burnout is something that's quite prevalent in the developer advocacy space. A lot of people will reach a point where they either quit or they turn around to their boss and say, I need at least a week off, probably a month off, because I've been absolutely hammering it for the past while. In about 3 weeks, I'm going to be traveling for 5 weeks straight. And I think in that time, I'll be home for 6 days. And I'm joking at the moment that home is going to be a place where I come to wash my clothes. And then I'll go on to my next trip again. So while I'm doing that, I need to make sure that in my mind, I still have weekends. Now, for me, the weekend might not be on a Saturday and a Sunday. One of the events I'm going to is actually on a Saturday. So I'm going to have my weekend on the Friday and the Sunday instead. But I'm going to make sure I don't work on that Friday. I make sure that I count travel time as working time because I'm doing it for work. Especially with like one of the conferences in Australia, and same for you going to New Zealand. It's a 20-ish hour flight.
Right.
If I did that and still worked 5 days a week, I wouldn't get any time to myself.
Right.
And flying is not great time to yourself, to be honest.
Yes.
Either you're trying to sleep with a crying baby, or you can't sleep, so you're trying to watch movies and you don't sleep, and therefore you wake up at the other end and you're jet lagged. And the travel time is work time. So there's lots of things like that I put into place. But it's also a lot of that becomes easy when you work in a supportive team. So one thing that I love about the developer advocates of Sonar and our manager is that we're all on the same page in terms of what it takes. Our manager was kind of still is. He still goes on the speaking scene a little bit. So he was a developer advocate before. We all know what the pressures can be. So when somebody turns around and says, hey, I've been working 7 days straight, so I'm going to take the next 2 days off, and it's the middle of the week, everyone's like, yeah, cool, fine, get better. Not that we're ill, but, exhaustion is a thing. So it's important to manage time. It gets trickier when you cross time zones. So just be aware of that. But yeah, mental health, self-help or self-care is a very important aspect of any job that requires that amount of travel, for sure.
100%. I hope I'll start my activities very soon. I really want to do it. But I'm going to do that for sure. And most of these events are always happening on the weekends only. Most of these conferences, I think 80-90% of the conference happens on the weekend. And even after traveling this much, we have to feel so energetic so that audience don't feel that they won't do it good, don't get bored, or they don't feel that. So we have to be ourselves supercharged to make sure for the reason we came over, we have to deliver that. But from that also, it's one of the things that also help a lot being on the stage is you should be very impromptu, right? But not everyone cope up with that. Not everyone can be impromptu. And I've seen you are very impromptu. I've seen in the 1 or 2 events for right. So, and I still remember I asked you in the dev days where you wear one traditional outfit, right? If you remember, you wear a traditional outfit and you describe that, and you also use that in your presentations as well to highlight, right? So it was impromptu. So first of all, what is the secret behind, like, how can you be so much impromptu? So, or so yes.
That's a very good question. I think a lot of it comes down to just being comfortable on stage, just to accept and to know that things are going to go wrong. The example that I gave earlier of that demo that went really wrong, I've had other demos go wrong in slightly less severe ways. And you just, if you don't have a backup strategy, then you just work something out on the fly. One thing as an aside, one thing to remember, if you are doing a live demo and it fails, that can actually be a learning opportunity for the audience. It's not necessarily a failure of the talk. It just means the talk has deviated in its purpose for a second. Because maybe you're doing live coding in TypeScript and you've typed some stuff out. I'm very bad at typing and talking at the same time, talking about a different thing. So if I'm explaining a process and typing at the same time, I will often make typos, or I will forget to import a module or something. And then the build will fail and you're like, and you're thrown for a second. And now you go into debug mode and you have a very quick look to see, and you say, sorry, just give me a second, I'm going to have a quick look at this. Take like 5 seconds of silence while the audience watches you. Sometimes somebody in the audience will shout out and tell you what you missed. And sometimes you look at it and go, yeah, cool, I've worked it out. So give yourself a short period of time to see whether you can work out what it is, fix it. And now the people in the audience have learned this is something that can go wrong and here's how I would fix it. and then you carry on with your talk. But anyway, I digress. So being impromptu is something that I've just grown over the years. I certainly would not have dealt with hiccups or stalls in a talk or any kind of presentation or scenario early on in my speaking career. It's just something that, again, with practice, practicing before you give your talk helps you give a better talk, but giving the talk live more often will build up that resilience to what happens when something goes wrong, because something will go wrong eventually. If you assume that nothing will ever go wrong, you're wrong.
Right.
So you don't necessarily need to be overly prepared for it, though. Just be ready to either ask for help. If you're doing live coding, can anybody see what the issue is? I've gone blind for a second. What am I missing here? Make it lighthearted, make it jovial.
Right.
If you start getting frustrated and angry, it's like, oh, I hate when technology goes wrong. Hang on a minute, I'm just going to fix this. Then suddenly the whole audience is like, oh, what's going on? So make it lighthearted. Bring them into the joke of the failure, that kind of thing. And one other thing that if you want to be really good at being able to handle situations like that, go to improv night. Actually start doing improv comedy. I haven't done that. I've started events in the past that are similar to improv. It was basically like a crossover between improv and speaker training, in which people came up and played games on stage. One of them was the slideshow roulette, where you get 4 random slides. You just start talking, and a slide comes up and you improvise, and you just go. And the good thing about that situation was that everybody in the audience knew that you had no idea what was going on. So everybody was really supportive. The tagline was, where the baseline is failure, because we're assuming everybody's going to fail. And even if you do slightly better than failure, you're winning. So yeah, go to maybe talk to your local meetup organizer about running lightning talks, and you have 1 half-hour session and then 6 5-minute lightning talks. You take one of those 5-minute lightning talks, and you get a friend to create random slides, and you just say, okay, I don't have anything real to talk to you about. I'm just going to talk for 5 minutes about slides I haven't seen, and people in the audience are probably going to find it funny. You can practice that way. So there's lots of ways that you can put yourself in situations where you have no idea what's happening, and you just need to build up that resilience to be able to go with the flow. So find things like that.
And I think that's also a good way to engage, because they then feel that they are part of it anyways.
Yeah.
And what I started watching the stand-up comedy, specifically in the crowd work. Crowd works where the stand-up comedy doesn't know what they want to talk. They try to interact with the audience, and based on what they interact, and on the basis of that conversation, they come up with the jokes.
Yes.
So that's something I'm watching a lot, and that helped me a lot. When I used to go to presentation, because you have to also need to make sure that the room is lighter. There is a very friendly environment. They feel comfortable to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it might happen with you as well. And I always think that whenever I go to any meetup or talk, I always feel that there are more smarter people than me who are sitting right in front of me. Smarter than me. I always think that there are smarter people sitting in front of me. So and you might got that question that you might don't know the answer about it, right? So I always deal with some way that, hey, I don't know, but I'm definitely gonna come back to get some details, or maybe I've chat surveys done with this meetup. So have you come up with this and you impromptu said anything? Have you recall anything?
Yeah, I've had questions in the past where I haven't known the answer off the top of my head. And I will do something along the lines of, that's a great question. I don't actually have an answer for you right now, but if you want to catch up with me during the break, we can look into it. Or sometimes it's also okay to just take a second and go, that's interesting, hang on. And then have a think, and maybe something will come to you and say, okay, well, here's a thought that I've just had about that. I'm not entirely sure whether this is the way I'll go about it, but how about if? And then you can try and banter, because Q&A doesn't have to be a I'm the expert scenario. It can be a let's have a conversation scenario. So you can always pivot the energy of a Q&A session to be whatever you want it to be. You could also even, and I've done this in the past, is say, I'm not actually sure. Does anybody else know the answer to that? Does anybody else face that scenario? And I've had somebody in the audience put their hand up, and then there's been a conversation between two people in the audience, and I'm just standing there going, this is cool. Drinking my water, have a bit of a break. So yeah, just if you feel comfortable doing it, get the audience involved. One thing with that though is that you also need to be confident that you can regain control of the conversation, because if those two people have a conversation for 5 minutes, everybody else in the audience is going to be bored. So if they can give a quick 10-second answer, and then you say, that's awesome, I'm so glad you found each other, can I suggest that you two meet up after the end of this talk? We'll get through the rest of the content, and then we can have a chat about this during the break, just to regain that control, because the last thing you want to do is lose 99% of the audience because these two people are having a conversation that nobody cares about.
100%. I'm going to take last two questions.
All right.
So if you would like to go back, because you have done so many things and might have some in our life, we always want to do something but might left. So if you have to go back in time and you want to change something and want to do something else, so what that would be?
So
Don't tell me stand up.
I wouldn't want to change it because I'm very happy with where I'm at. But if I had taken another choice in life and didn't realize how good this version of my life could be, I would say I used to do a lot of theater work, like the backstage and front of house lighting and audio and set design and those kind of things. So that was a lot of fun, working with actors when I can't act necessarily, but in that really creative kind of field. It's a great crossover between technology and creativity. I guess it's probably the reason why I like home automation as well, because I'm basically turning my home into a theater that's controlled remotely. It's kind of cool. The other thing, I just love travel. You have Nomad in your Twitter handle. I think you and I are probably as nomadic as each other. I have now lived in, I don't know where I'm up to. I think it's like my 5th country. And I don't necessarily feel at home in a particular place. The thing that I love about places is the people that I meet there, and I'll always go back to see those people. But it's been 3-4 months, whatever, since I left Melbourne. I don't miss Melbourne necessarily. It's a nice city. I'd live there again. I miss the people there, the friends that I've left behind. Who, if you're watching, I'm going to be over in a few months again. I'll see you then. But yeah, anything involving travel, meeting people, getting out and about. That's the other thing, I suppose, about theater work is if you're working in a theater and all of these performance groups are coming through, you meet so many people from all over the world that way. But there's also an opportunity to travel the world and work in theaters elsewhere. So I think that could have been a really fun job.
Artistic work, right? Artistic work.
Which software engineering is as well. If software engineering wasn't artistic, then we would all write code exactly the same way. And we would only need one programming language, I think. So yes, definitely very artistic endeavor.
100%. Is your perspective to look, the way you look into it? Because my dream, as a child, I wanted to be an actor, right? That's even I played in a lot of dramas in my school, but the life is actually very different, right? Because when you after school, when you take a left, the real life is, right? So you need to be realistic, like what could be work. But technology is something very I'm passionate about, so I pursue it, and then I try to whatever I want to do, be an artist over here. I try to did everything over here. So all I want to do in front of camera, this way or that way, I am right. So ultimately, I did the job. But yes, so ultimately, you really want to do what you really like. And my last question for you is, what open source means to you?
Oh, it might not be the hardest question, but it's certainly the one with the potentially longest answer. All right, at its core, open source means community. That's it.
Yes.
Open source software is maintained and looked after by the community, even if there are corporations that support through providing funds or developers, PR requests, all of those kind of things. It's still community driven, and the projects survive based on the community as well. I've seen software projects fail because the project itself, the tool was brilliant, but the community became toxic. And then the rest of the community are like, we're not going to use that anymore. We'll either use an alternative, or in most cases, we're going to write a new one. I'm sure we've seen that a couple of times in our history.
Yes.
So ultimately, open source is community. It's as complex as community. It has as many ups and downs as community.
Yeah.
But without it, the world would be a very different place.
100%. And so this is the only question that this is the same question I ask every of my guests at the end, because I really wanted to hear their perspective, because open source changed my life a lot.
Yeah.
And I've seen it help so many people in not just a tech way, but also in a non-technical way. Also, it's create a lot of opportunity, a lot of community building activities where they're part of it. And in an organization level, they actually build a culture. There was no culture when there was no community. There was no open source, because when open source came, build a community, and now when community comes, it's create a culture. So it's all about. So for me, open source is all about culture. So So to conclude this one, at the end, you have any question for me? Because this was one of my longest podcasts, because my podcast was the last 1 hour, but this was more than. But yeah, I'm sure you had fun, right?
Do I get a trophy for that?
Yeah, of course. I'm whenever we're gonna meet next, maybe in India or maybe somewhere else.
I was half expecting, like, have you seen Fool Us? I was expecting a trophy to come down behind me just now. I'm disappointed you didn't sort this out.
But I had a great time, Ben. I think this worth now. Yes, it's worth now that whatever the meeting that we scheduled or it postponed, now it's worth now, because all we wanted a candid conversation where people can relate. Because to be very honest, success can be relatable, but success cannot be relatable, but failure is relatable, because to get that success, what are the steps that you've taken, that is familiar for everyone. It's same for me, same for everybody. So that's where I can relate.
Failure is just a learning opportunity.
Absolutely.
If you don't fail, you don't grow.
Yeah, of course. And people cannot relate. That's the reason people cannot relate success. They can relate to the failure. That's a great way to share what we did, right? People know actually what we do, but whatever we're doing right now, what are the things that we have done in the past to reach over here? That is the story that we want to convey, and that is the purpose of I started this podcast. I hope you had a great fun, and soon we are going to meet, maybe in the India or probably in the conference, right?
Probably somewhere in the world.
Yes, of course. I'm delighted that we had this conversation, and thanks everyone who also watching this one. I'm going to put all the information which Ben has shared, all the reference links that might going to help you out as well, right? So I'm going to share that with you. And meanwhile, just want to share one thing: just keep doing what you're doing it, and don't forget to share all the awesome work that you're doing it, because that's very important, right? Because we do all awesome work, but we tend to forget to share with others. So do that. Makes sense, and that's might be create a good sense of conversation with the peers, because you don't know, maybe the person next seated with you might be a good opportunity to collaborate with them, talk to them, network with them, or maybe work with them, or maybe just chill with them. You never know, right? So
I love
thanks everyone for
great advice,
and thanks Ben for having this amazing conversation. I'm sure people are gonna love that.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks to everybody who's listening.